You are the Director of Access and Policy at Elsevier. So what is your role and what are you meant to accomplish in this role?
Okay, thanks for the invitation and for the chance to be here. The role has existed for about 5 years in Elsevier, and it is a role with a small team. We're responsible for open access strategy and policy, and also for making sure that any access gaps in the dissemination of our subscription content are identified and closed, and that's the Universal Access Program.
Universal Access Program. And what part of the company is that? Is it?
That's a hard question to answer. You wouldn't think it would be.
No.
We move around a little bit. The group started out in the Central Strategy Department, and we've come to rest at the minute in research management. But we might move again, who knows? But the point is we work across all the business units, and we're not tied to any one particular part of the business.
Alicia, yesterday you spoke at a panel, and it was dealing with how facilitating of sharing among researchers. And one of the things you guys were looking at was the need for collaboration between libraries and publishers to make this happen properly and to have it done right. And I'm just wondering, what were the most impressive or the most thoughtful suggestions that came out of the session, and what were you suggesting yourself?
Thanks for that question. So it was a lively lunch session, and it was a small group. We had about 15 people there, I think, but a nice balance of librarians and publishers. And it was really well facilitated by Maggie Farrell at Clemson.
Okay, sure.
So we were talking about how to facilitate researchers in their sharing needs. We started out talking about all of the different systems that researchers use to share articles on campus.
Right.
You know, anything from the institutional repository to MOOCs and courseware management systems, Dropbox, email, the overwhelming favorite. And then we were talking about how to collaborate, and some of the challenges that we can work, I think, really effectively on together is making it much clearer for researchers that they can share with confidence on the platform of their choice by working together to make sure all of the licensing and the copyright implications are sorted out so they don't need to worry about it. And one of the ideas that came out was it was a request, an invitation for librarians to have a look at the STM Association's article sharing principles and give our community feedback about whether you find those mutually agreeable as kinds of rules of the road for facilitating article sharing.
You also were on a panel on text and data mining contracts, if I'm not mistaken. And there's been a little controversy around that, around some of it, and I'd like you to address that a little bit. And as far as Elsevier's point of view, what was the main message that you wanted to get across?
In the TDM session yesterday, it was that publishers, not only Elsevier, but across the spectrum in our community, we're all actively supporting researchers to do text and data mining, but it's still very much, I think, in the early adoption phase. Researchers are approaching TDM in different ways in different subject areas. We're all needing to invest in new systems and support procedures, just as libraries are. So if you see something that doesn't work quite right, doesn't look quite right, talk to your publisher. It's probably that they're working through some kinks and are willing to be responsive rather than them trying to make it complicated, which is a misperception sometimes, I think.
And the licensing, I think there has been some criticism about the licensing that's required by Elsevier. Is that a firm policy, or is that something that is also being, in the sense of work in progress?
Well, all of our policies are reviewed periodically, but that one is stable at the minute. And let me explain why that we do licensing. We are supporting researchers around the globe. They are based in different institutions, in different states, in different countries. They all have different legal frameworks. So we just need an easy, light touch way that we can roll out text and data mining services to all of them. So we've got a simple clause that's being inserted in the Science Direct Site licenses. There's no additional cost. And then there's an easy click-through agreement for the individual API users.
So do individuals have to do this, or is this the libraries getting the license?
So the library is getting the clause and the license, but we do ask the individual users to do the click-through license. And the reason is, to do their mining, they are actually running code, software programs on our platforms, and we need them to just be sensitive to the fact that they need to be thoughtful and mindful about what that code is going to do, and we need a way to get in contact with them just in case their script doesn't work the way they had anticipated.
Really, it's not an attempt to be restrictive, at least it's an attempt to...
It's enabling, it's intended to be enabling.
To clarify things as far as the coding, I say.
I wonder if you would, for everybody who's perhaps not clear what text and data mining is all about, it might be useful just to give an example of a project that involves text and data mining and how Elsevier might be involved with that.
Okay. There are lots of different approaches, but let me think of one specific example. A chemist might want to search across a very broad array of literature, not only from Elsevier, but from other publishers as well, to identify all of the bits of text that refer to a particular chemical compound, and they can do that. We are working in collaboration with other publishers through the Crossref service to give miners the chance to be able to identify which publisher platforms they need access to, and to be able to send their mining tools across our platforms.
And the end result of this search is what?
It can be different things. Sometimes the outputs are quantitative. They're counting the occurrences. Sometimes there's snippets of text, so maybe those chemical compounds in a sentence or two of context. Sometimes, for example, if it is a linguist doing the searching, maybe they need a larger chunk of text. There'll be nothing numeric at all. They're actually interested in the word in its context, to look at how meanings change over time, for example. A very broad array of outputs.
And so the output of such a search is not something you publish, it is something that becomes data for doing other research.
Well, it could be both, actually. Yeah. And that's, again, what we're working through. Because sometimes the data outputs, especially if they contain a lot of text and are to be republished or put on the web, that could potentially impinge on the subscription model or whatever for the journal. So we're all trying to figure this out.
I was going to say, it's very much a work in progress in that regard.
Yeah, that's right. We have I think it's a 200-word snippet limit now on the redisplay of outputs. But again, if a researcher finds that a barrier, we just encourage them to talk to us. We can be flexible.
Okay. Of the researchers who have actually gone through the process of licensing the capability of doing the mining, has anybody been turned down?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
What kind of problems have you run into? Have you run into problems with coding?
Well, sometimes, yeah. I think you have to have more programming skills than I personally have to be able to do text and data mining at the minute. It's not easy and effortless. I think we're all, again, in our research community on a learning curve about this. So occasionally the scripts that they run do kind of run haywire. This is one of the reasons we do text and data mining on a different platform than the platform that our human readers use, because we don't want to impinge on their service or slow their response times down. So you get the occasional hiccup, but most of the time it's fine.
Things that we have recently experienced at my own institution was canceling 3 big deal packages, not Elsevier's as it happens, and it was really a matter of a lack of budget flexibility and the difficulty in planning when your budget is carved up into enormous chunks that cannot be reduced in a time of budget difficulties. So we didn't save any money, but we at least did gain flexibility in the process of losing access to thousands of titles. So I guess one question I would have for you is, how do you see the big deal in Elsevier's future, and what relationship might there be between changing access models such as open access and the viability of package deals like the big deal?
So I'm sorry that you had to go through that exercise. It sounds really painful, actually. And thanks for keeping our big deal. That's kind of you. How do publishers think about it? We know libraries need flexibility. That's why we all tend to have big deal packages and subject collections, and you can buy by title, and you can purchase on demand as well through pay-per-view services and whatever. It's really our job to offer libraries choices. It sounds like you had to make some very difficult choices.
So the big deal, would you call it a preferred model for Elsevier, or does that not really matter?
No, in our view, it's the library's decision about the right way that it's comfortable for you to purchase. I suppose the advantage of the breadth of subject matter is that users, particularly interdisciplinary users or people browsing across new subject areas, might want to access and use materials that you wouldn't select for your collections, and I'm sure you're painfully aware of that as well.
Yeah.
So the broadest spectrum of content obviously is desirable, but that's not always.
It doesn't, in that sense, it doesn't really change Elsevier's view of how it will accomplish its own goals, whether libraries take big deal packages or others.
No. Our job is to offer flexible purchasing options. Now, you asked about open access in the big deal. I don't know how to answer that at this point. Some publishers are piloting and experimenting with combining the two through offsetting deals, for example, where maybe for an uplift, you get both your subscription access and your open access article publishing charges paid. We haven't piloted such a model yet, though we're in discussions and trying to look at how we can help libraries with the affordability challenges that come with maintaining subscription collections, and then also adding open access publishing fees on top of that.
What portion of Elsevier's titles are now open access?
All of them. So they all have green open access options, so self-archiving options. And then for the gold open access model, which is where articles can be funded through upfront article publishing charges, we have around 325 fully gold OA titles. We have over 1,600 hybrid titles. And there are, if I can do my maths then, that leaves about 500 titles, typically society-owned titles, that may not have gold OA publishing options at this point.
Okay, so it's the gold OA then, that in the sense that an open access title requires no subscription to access. It is those titles that really make big deals a difficult sell from a publisher to a library. So in that sense, the more gold open access there is in your portfolio, the less need there is for libraries to take these packages.
But counterintuitively, really counterintuitively, at least for us, I don't know if this is true for all publishers, but we're actually seeing our subscription content growing as the gold open access content is growing. The gold OA articles are growing faster, but from a very tiny base.
Yes.
But the counterintuitive part is that we're still launching subscription journals, and we're still seeing 3, 4, 5% growth in the volume of subscription articles.
Okay.
And I think a lot of librarians I talk to, a lot of researchers I talk to, assume that the gold open access publishing is substituting for the subscription content,
Yes.
and therefore the subscription prices will drop and the rest of it. In fact, it's just slowing the growth rate for subscription publishing.
Is it the hybrid, when you talk about the number of articles,
Yes.
is it because of hybrid journals that it is mixed, the growth and of open access and subscription?
So the reason it's growing is because internationally, governments around the world are actually continuing to invest in research, and that grows at around 4% every year. So the number of researchers is growing in countries like China and India and Brazil. Those researchers are all publishing articles. So the total volume is growing. And then from our perspective, it's the author's choice, whether they want to publish the open access model or the subscription model. Either way is cool with us. But they're both growing counterintuitively.
Okay.